At my college graduation, my father called me a loser who would never amount to anything because I chose military service over law school. My mother nodded in agreement while my siblings looked away. 12 years later, I stood in NATO headquarters as the newly appointed Allied Forces General, and when the Supreme Commander introduced me to the International Assembly, he bowed deeply. Madam Allied Forces General Thompson. The moment my family saw that footage on international news, that was when they finally understood what I'd been building all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is General Catherine Thompson, and I was born into a family that believed military service was for people who couldn't succeed in prestigious civilian careers. But that's not the complete story. The first time I mentioned wanting to join the military, I was 16. My father, a senior partner at a top-tier law firm, looked at me like I'd announced plans to waste my potential. "Intelligent women don't throw away their futures playing soldier," he said, adjusting his Rolex. "The military is for people who can't handle the intellectual rigor of real professions." My mother, a federal judge, shook her head disapprovingly. "Catherine, darling, you're far too brilliant for that. Military service is what working-class families choose when they lack better options." They had my entire future architected. Law school at Harvard, like my father. Maybe the federal bench, like my mother. Definitely something that would impress at judicial conferences and bar association dinners. When colleagues asked about their children, they'd proudly discuss my older brother James's partnership track at a prestigious firm and my younger sister Rachel's acceptance to medical school. But when it came to my military aspirations, they'd quickly redirect the conversation. Outside our affluent social circle, their professional network shared the same disdain for military service. The Andersons next door, the Clarks from the Judicial Club, the Washingtons who owned a major law practice. They all treated their children's civilian achievements like Supreme Court victories. High-status careers meant successful parenting. Military service meant family failure. At prep school, I lived a contradiction. I was valedictorian, debate team champion, and student government president. But at home, none of that mattered when weighed against my fixation on military service. My mother once said to her judicial colleagues, loud enough for me to hear, "Catherine's exceptional, but she has this peculiar obsession with the Army. We're hoping Yale Law School will redirect her towards something meaningful." I remember the day I brought home my acceptance to West Point like it was carved in stone. Full appointment to the United States Military Academy, one of only 50 women selected that year. I was 17, holding what I believed was my passport to everything I'd ever dreamed of. My father barely glanced at it before dismissing it entirely. "That's interesting, sweetheart, but let's discuss serious universities. I've already spoken to the dean at Harvard Law about your application." My mother attempted a gentler but equally devastating approach. "Darling, you don't comprehend what you'd be sacrificing. The military will constrain your intellectual growth and limit your potential. You'll spend your career following orders, instead of making decisions that matter." She presented articles about military bureaucracy and limited advancement opportunities. "Is this really what you want for your brilliant mind?" But I saw something entirely different in those military academy brochures. I saw officers who dedicated their lives to protecting freedom and democracy. I saw leadership, honor, and service that transcended personal ambition. While my family saw limitations, I saw the opportunity to serve something greater than individual success. Rachel tried to be supportive, at least privately. "I think it's brave," she whispered one evening when our parents were arguing downstairs about my obstinacy. But even she didn't truly comprehend. "Maybe you could do military law? That way you could still make Dad proud." That's when I realized this wasn't simply about career choices. This was about fundamentally incompatible worldviews regarding success, purpose, and what constituted a meaningful life. At West Point, I flourished in ways my family couldn't fathom. While they attended judicial conferences and law firm retreats, I was studying military strategy, mastering international relations, and developing leadership skills that would prepare me for global command responsibilities. During holiday breaks, I'd return home in my cadet uniform, only to be asked to change into civilian clothes before family events. "People will think we're being ostentatious," my mother would say, though I understood the truth. They were embarrassed by my choice. The contrast became increasingly painful each semester. At the academy, I was respected for my strategic analysis and international perspective. I graduated in the top 3% of my class, served as first captain of the Corps of Cadets, and earned recognition for my thesis on NATO alliance cooperation. My professors saw future general officer potential. My fellow cadets saw natural leadership ability. But at home, none of that translated into recognition. During my sophomore year, James made junior partner at his law firm and got engaged to a federal prosecutor. The family hosted an elaborate celebration at their country club, complete with judges and senior attorneys, celebrating what my parents called a perfect union of legal excellence. When guests inquired about me, my parents would mention I was studying leadership, but never specified where or in what context. When I tried to share stories about military ethics courses or international security seminars, the conversation would quickly pivot to James's latest case victories or Rachel's medical school achievements. Catherine's always been the ambitious one, my father would say, with a strained smile. Very driven. The word driven became their code for misguided and stubborn. Rachel was trapped in the middle, attempting to bridge our growing divide. Tell them about your international studies, she'd whisper encouragingly. But when I mentioned NATO's strategic doctrine or multinational military cooperation, the room would fall silent, and someone would inevitably steer toward more appropriate subjects. I began noticing how they discussed other military families in our social sphere. When the Harrison family's daughter joined the Air Force Academy, my parents would speak about her in patronizing tones. Such a waste of intellectual capability, my mother would sigh. She could have been clerking for the Supreme Court by now. When General Morrison's son attended our neighborhood gatherings, they'd treat him politely but privately discuss his, quote, limited earning potential. Military service wasn't viewed as honorable in their world. It was seen as intellectual surrender, a failure to maximize educational advantages. The breaking point occurred during my junior year. I'd been selected for the International Cadet Exchange Program with NATO military academies, studying alliance strategy and multinational command structures across Europe. It was an extraordinary opportunity that would establish my foundation for international military leadership. When I called home excited to share this achievement, my father's response was devastating. Catherine, we need to have a serious discussion about your future. This military obsession has lasted long enough. I can still arrange your admission to Harvard Law School if you resign from West Point next semester. Dad, this isn't an obsession. This is my calling to international service. Your calling? His voice escalated. Playing war games with foreign militaries while real leaders shape international law? Catherine, you're squandering every intellectual advantage we've provided. My mother took the phone, her tone gentle but inflexible. Sweetheart, we're genuinely concerned about you. This fixation on military affairs isn't healthy for someone with your intellectual capacity. Perhaps you should speak with Dr. Williams about these compulsions. That phrase haunted me. Not help us understand your passion or explain your vision. Perhaps I should speak with someone about my compulsions. As if my dedication to military service was a psychological disorder requiring professional intervention. That summer in Europe, surrounded by brilliant officers from allied nations who devoted their lives to protecting democratic values and international security, I felt more at home than I ever had in my family's mansion. My graduation from West Point should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. I finished first in my class, earned the Distinguished Cadet Award for Leadership Excellence, and was commissioned as a second lieutenant with orders to report to the 82nd Airborne Division. The ceremony was held on a magnificent June morning at the Academy, with thousands of families celebrating as their sons and daughters crossed the stage to receive their commissions and begin their military careers. My family attended, but their presence felt more like a funeral than a celebration. While other parents wept with pride, taking countless photographs and cheering enthusiastically, mine sat rigidly in their seats. My father checked his phone throughout the ceremony, occasionally sighing audibly. My mother maintained a polite smile, but never applauded. Only Rachel seemed genuinely excited, standing when my name was called for the leadership award. After the ceremony, as families gathered for congratulatory photographs and celebrations, I watched the Mitchell family embrace their son, a new infantry officer, with overwhelming emotion. "We're so proud," his mother sobbed. "You're going to serve our nation with honor and protect freedom around the world." When I approached my family, my father's opening words were crushing. "Well, that's finished. Now you can begin something that actually matters. Dad, this isn't finished. This is just the beginning. I'm a commissioned officer now. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My mother stepped forward, touching my arm with false compassion. Catherine, you've proven whatever you needed to prove. You can still apply to law school this fall. Your father has already contacted admissions committees at several top programs. That's when I realized they'd never viewed my military commission as legitimate. To them, West Point was an expensive 4-year leadership development program, not the foundation of my military career. They'd spent my entire education waiting for me to mature beyond this phase and join the civilian professional elite. The real devastation came that evening at what should have been my celebration dinner. Instead of congratulating me, my family orchestrated what could only be described as an intervention. My parents had reserved a private dining room at their exclusive club and invited Dr. Patricia Williams, a family psychiatrist and longtime colleague. They'd also insisted James and Rachel attend, creating a circle of concerned faces all focused on redirecting me. Catherine, my father began, we're gathered here because we love you and we're deeply worried about your trajectory. Dr. Williams leaned forward with clinical concern. Your family has expressed concerns about your continued commitment to military service. They believe you might be using military structure to avoid the challenges and responsibilities of civilian professional life. I looked around the circle. James avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable but compliant. Rachel appeared ready to flee. My mother was already emotional. We believe you're running away from your potential, my mother said through tears. First to this military academy, now to combat assignments. When will you stop avoiding reality and come home to build a meaningful career? I'm not avoiding anything. I'm serving my country as a commissioned officer. My father's composure finally shattered. Serving your country? Catherine, you're wasting a West Point education while your siblings build substantial careers. James just made partner. Rachel's been accepted to residency at Johns Hopkins. What do you have to show for 4 years except a uniform and a gun? That's when I grasped the full extent of their delusion. They genuinely believed that military service was inferior to civilian achievement, even after I'd graduated from one of America's most prestigious institutions. Dr. Williams spoke again. Catherine, your family worries that you're using military hierarchy to avoid making independent decisions in the competitive civilian marketplace. I stood up, my hands trembling with rage and disappointment. Independent decisions? I've been making leadership decisions that affect people's lives since I was 18. The room fell completely silent. For the first time, I'd vocalized what we all understood. I didn't belong with people who viewed my greatest accomplishment as my greatest failure. After walking out of that intervention, I didn't speak to my family for 11 months. I immersed myself completely in my assignment with the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, leading paratroopers through rigorous training exercises and international deployment preparations. The work was challenging, purposeful, and exactly what I'd trained for, everything my family claimed military service could never provide. But their words echoed in my mind during quiet moments. Wasting your education, avoiding real challenges, running from civilian competition. I began meticulously documenting everything, not because I planned to vindicate myself to them, but because I needed proof that I wasn't delusional about my capabilities and potential. I preserved every fitness report, every commendation, every evaluation that praised my leadership and strategic thinking. My performance reviews were exceptional. Lieutenant Thompson demonstrates extraordinary leadership potential and strategic acumen. Recommend for accelerated promotion and advanced military education. Outstanding officer with unlimited potential for senior command positions. I maintained these records in a private file, evidence that contradicted my family's narrative about my squandered intellect. During my infrequent calls with Rachel, our conversations carefully navigated around the obvious tension. How's Army life treating you? She'd ask cautiously. I'm thriving, Rachel. Leading soldiers, making decisions with real consequences. Mom asks about you sometimes. She worries you're isolated. Does she? Or does she worry that I'm too fulfilled to abandon this path? The silence always provided the answer. I learned through Rachel that my parents had been telling their professional circle I was gaining leadership experience and would likely transition to corporate law or federal service once I, quote, completed my military obligation. They'd even preserved my childhood bedroom exactly as I'd left it, as if my military career was an extended internship. James visited me once at Fort Bragg during a business trip to North Carolina. We met for dinner near the base. He seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking about military leadership and international operations. For a moment, I hoped maybe one family member might finally understand. The leadership development sounds valuable, he admitted. But Catherine, don't you want financial security, professional prestige, intellectual stimulation? This military experience is impressive, but it's not sustainable for someone with your capabilities. Even James, who I'd hoped might be different, viewed my career as temporary. A character-building experience to outgrow, rather than a calling to embrace. That conversation crystallized something crucial. My family's inability to accept my choices wasn't about concern for my well-being. It was about their own identity and worldview. Having a daughter in military service challenged their beliefs about success, intelligence, and what constituted a worthwhile career for educated women. I began preparing for the possibility that this divide might become permanent. I established my own financial independence, completely separate from the family trust fund I'd never touched. I cultivated relationships with mentors in the military who became my chosen family, senior officers who understood dedication, sacrifice, and the honor of serving something greater than personal advancement. Colonel Maria Santos, my battalion commander, became particularly influential. She'd faced similar family resistance early in her career. Some families can't see beyond their own limitations, she told me during one of our mentoring sessions. Your responsibility isn't to make them understand. Your responsibility is to serve with excellence and let your achievements demonstrate your worth. I started maintaining a journal, not about my family's rejection, but about my professional aspirations. I wanted to make captain ahead of schedule. I wanted to attend the Command and General Staff College. I wanted to serve in NATO assignments and prove that American officers could lead international coalitions effectively. For the first time, I was charting a future based entirely on my own vision, not my family's expectations. I was becoming the officer I'd always envisioned myself being, even if it meant becoming unrecognizable to the people who'd raised me. The woman my family had tried to redirect was precisely who I was meant to become. 4 years into my military career, I achieved something that fundamentally changed everything. Selection for NATO International Staff Assignment, and early promotion to Major. At 26, I was chosen to serve as a liaison officer at NATO headquarters in Brussels, coordinating multinational military operations across allied nations. The day I received the notification, I was conducting joint training exercises with British paratroopers at Fort Bragg. Colonel Santos called me into her office, her expression serious but her eyes radiating pride. Thompson, you've been selected for immediate assignment to NATO headquarters. Your work on multinational coordination and strategic planning caught the attention of some very important people at the Pentagon in Brussels. She handed me the assignment orders, and I read them twice before the magnitude sank in. Major Catherine Thompson, NATO International Staff Strategic Planning Division, reporting directly to the Supreme Allied Commander. An assignment that typically required 8 years of experience, and I'd earned it in 4. For the first time since graduation, I felt compelled to contact my family. Surely this would prove that my career wasn't a temporary phase or mistake. This was validation from the highest levels of international military leadership that I belonged on the global stage. Mike called Rachel first. Her excitement was genuine but mixed with confusion. Catherine, that's incredible, but NATO? You're going to work with foreign militaries? Rachel, do you think Mom and Dad would want to know about this? There was a long pause. I think they should know. This sounds really important, even if I don't fully understand it. I called home that evening, my heart racing as the phone rang. My mother answered, and her voice immediately brightened when she heard mine. Catherine, oh sweetheart, it's so wonderful to hear from you. We've missed you terribly. Mom, I have significant news, career-changing news. Are you finally ready to transition out? Have you decided to apply to law school? No, Mom. I've been promoted to major and selected for NATO headquarters in Brussels. I'm going to be coordinating international military operations. The silence stretched endlessly. I could hear her breathing but no words. Mom? Brussels? Her voice was strained. Catherine, that sounds complicated. Are you sure this is making you happy? When my father took the phone, his response was even more deflating. NATO headquarters? What does that actually mean for your long-term career prospects? Can you leverage that international experience into corporate consulting when you're ready to be serious? They couldn't even acknowledge my achievement without immediately searching for an exit strategy. That weekend, I walked through the streets of Brussels during my reconnaissance visit, passing the European Parliament and NATO's imposing headquarters. Diplomats and military officers from dozens of nations worked together in those buildings, coordinating the defense of democratic values worldwide. I called Colonel Santos, who'd become my most trusted mentor. Maria, I think I need to accept that my family will never understand this world. Catherine, some families can't recognize greatness because they're limited by their own experiences. But your NATO family will see it. Your international colleagues will see it. The alliance will see it. That's what matters. She was absolutely right. The military had become my real family. My fellow officers celebrated my achievements without reservation. My commanders invested in my development because they recognized my potential for senior leadership. The institution itself had embraced me completely. Moving to Brussels felt like arriving at my true destination. My apartment was modest but perfectly located, walking distance from NATO headquarters, where I'd be working alongside the most brilliant military minds from allied nations. I sent my family a postcard from the Grand Place, working at NATO headquarters now. Finally where I truly belong. My mother's response arrived 3 weeks later. We're keeping your room ready for when you're finished with this international phase. I filed that letter away. There would be no finishing because this international phase was my real-life beginning. The call came at 3 a.m. Brussels time, jerking me awake in my NATO quarters. Rachel's voice was panicked, cutting through the international connection as I prepared for a critical multinational briefing later that morning. Catherine, something's wrong with Dad. He's having severe anxiety attacks and has been hospitalized. The doctors think it's stress-related cardiac symptoms. Mom says it's because you're so far away working with foreign militaries. I was scheduled to brief Allied commanders on Eastern European security in 5 hours, but the familiar weight of family guilt crashed over me. Despite everything, he was still my father, and somehow my NATO assignment was being blamed for his health crisis. How serious is his condition? I asked, checking the time and knowing I had critical intelligence briefings to prepare. Serious enough that he can't work. The doctors are discussing extended medical leave. Mom's completely distraught, and she's blaming your NATO assignment for pushing him over the edge. When I managed to reach my mother later that day, her voice was filled with barely controlled hysteria. Catherine, your father hasn't slept since you moved to Brussels. He lies awake every night, worried about you working with foreign governments and getting involved in international conflicts. Mom, I'm coordinating peaceful military cooperation between democratic allies. Peaceful? Her voice escalated. You're involved in military planning with countries we barely know. Your father is terrified you'll get caught up in some international incident, and will never see you again. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent briefing request from the Supreme Allied Commander, and I had to end the call to coordinate response strategies for emerging security threats. When I called back hours later, my father was on the line, his voice weak and filled with distress. Catherine, I need you to come home. I need you to resign from NATO and come back to America before this family completely falls apart. Dad, I can't abandon my responsibilities to 29 allied nations. Your responsibilities? His voice cracked with emotion and anger. What about your responsibilities to the family that raised you and loves you? Are foreign governments more important than your own parents? That's when my mother reclaimed the phone. Catherine, Dr. Peterson says your father's condition is directly related to international deployment stress. If something happens to him while you're playing diplomat with foreigners, how will you live with yourself? The manipulation was staggering. They'd weaponized my father's anxiety about my international service, transforming his inability to understand my career into a medical emergency for which I was responsible. 3 weeks later, the situation escalated dramatically. I received an official message through State Department channels that my family had contacted the American Embassy in Brussels, claiming I was needed for a family emergency and requesting immediate repatriation to the United States. Brigadier General Williams, my NATO supervisor, called me into his office, which overlooked the Alliance's flag-lined courtyard. Thompson, I've received some highly unusual requests from your family through diplomatic channels. They're claiming your father's health crisis requires your immediate return to America, and suggesting that your NATO assignment is causing severe psychological distress to family members. I stared at him, realizing the full scope of their interference. Sir, my family disapproves of my international military career and is attempting to force me to abandon my NATO responsibilities. That's an extremely serious accusation, Major. Yes, sir, it is. He studied my performance evaluations, then looked up. Your work has been exemplary. Your multinational coordination has strengthened alliance operations, and your strategic analysis has been invaluable. But these family interventions through diplomatic channels create significant complications. The investigation that followed was conducted while I continued coordinating critical alliance operations. NATO security personnel interviewed me extensively. My personal stability was questioned. My commitment to international service was scrutinized. All because my family had decided that if they couldn't convince me to leave NATO, they'd make NATO question my fitness for international duty. 8 months into my NATO assignment, the warfare against my career became systematic and international in scope. It started with subtle interference I initially dismissed as family desperation. My emergency contact information was altered without authorization. Questions were raised about my family's stability during routine security reviews. Then I discovered the devastating extent of their campaign. My deputy, Lieutenant Colonel Hans Müller from the German Army, pulled me aside after a successful multinational exercise coordination meeting. Catherine, I must tell you something uncomfortable. Someone claiming to be your mother has been contacting American diplomatic personnel, suggesting you've been showing signs of psychological instability while working with foreign militaries. My blood turned to ice. What kind of contacts? She reached out to the U.S. Embassy's military attaché office, claiming you'd been writing concerning letters about international tensions and that your NATO assignment was compromising your mental health. She suggested the Americans should remove you from international duty for your own safety. I sat in my Brussels office that night, reviewing classified alliance intelligence while processing the reality that my family was actively sabotaging my NATO career through diplomatic channels. The attacks escalated rapidly. Rachel called me through secure channels 2 weeks later, her voice filled with anguish and fear. Catherine, I'm so sorry. They forced me to do something terrible. What did they make you do? Mom and Dad threatened to disown me and cut off my medical residency funding if I didn't write a letter to the State Department. They made me say I was worried about your mental state, that you'd been writing disturbing things about international conflicts and seemed unstable working with foreign governments. My hands trembled as I ended the call. My own sister had been coerced into filing false reports about my fitness for international duty through official diplomatic channels. The following morning, Brigadier General Williams summoned me to his secure conference room. He was a seasoned alliance officer who'd always supported my multinational coordination work. But his expression was deeply troubled. Thompson, I've received multiple concerning reports about your personal situation through both military and diplomatic channels. Family members expressing worry about your psychological state claims that international service has made you unfit for alliance responsibilities. Sir, those reports are completely fabricated. My family is attempting to force me out of NATO by undermining my fitness for international duty. That's an extraordinarily serious accusation, Major. Yes, sir. And it's happening while I'm successfully coordinating critical alliance operations. He studied my performance reports and multinational evaluations, then looked up. Your strategic work has been exceptional. Allied commanders specifically request your involvement in sensitive operations. But these family concerns create complications for your security clearance and international posting. The investigation that followed was conducted while I continued managing sensitive alliance coordination. NATO security specialists evaluated me extensively. My international relationships were scrutinized. My commitment to Allied cooperation was questioned. All because my family had decided that if they couldn't convince me to leave NATO, They'd make NATO want me to leave. But I had allies fighting for me. Colonel Santos, now working at the Pentagon, connected me with the NATO Legal Affairs Office. This is more serious than personal family interference, the alliance attorney explained. When families weaponize diplomatic channels to undermine international military cooperation, it threatens alliance security. Meanwhile, I learned my family had expanded their campaign internationally. My mother had contacted James's law firm, asking them to research legal methods for forcing American military personnel to resign from NATO assignments. My father had reached out to family friends in international business, spreading concerns about my instability and asking them to monitor my NATO status. They'd transformed my international military service into a mental health crisis within their professional networks. At legal conferences and business events, I became the cautionary tale about what happens when daughters choose international military service over family stability. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd contacted Rachel's boyfriend, who worked for an international medical organization, trying to convince him that dating someone with a mentally unstable sister in NATO was professionally risky for his international career. The decision to expose my family's sabotage campaign came after they crossed a line that threatened international security. My intelligence liaison, Captain Sarah Kim from the ROK Army, approached me after a classified alliance briefing with information that changed everything. "Catherine, your family contacted the South Korean embassy in Washington. They filed an official report claiming you've been compromised by foreign influences and that your NATO work represents a security risk to American interests." My father had reached into international diplomatic channels, attempting to convince allied nations that I was a security threat, to destroy my NATO career and international reputation. I requested an immediate meeting with Supreme Allied Commander General Patricia Hayes. Her office overlooked NATO's central courtyard, walls displaying flags from all 29 member nations. Her expression was grave as I explained the full scope of my situation. "General Hayes, my family is conducting a systematic campaign to end my NATO career through false accusations and diplomatic interference. I have documentation of their coordinated efforts across multiple Allied channels." She reviewed my file, the NATO legal affairs analysis, and the timeline of diplomatic incidents. After 45 minutes of silence, she looked up with steely determination. "Major Thompson, what you're describing is an attack on alliance integrity and international military cooperation. This threatens NATO's operational security and cannot be tolerated." General Hayes didn't just believe me. She launched an immediate alliance-wide investigation. Within days, NATO security specialists were interviewing personnel across member nations. They discovered a pattern of false reports, coordinated timing, and clear evidence of malicious intent to undermine international military cooperation. The investigation revealed that my family had contacted diplomatic missions from 12 allied nations, 8 international security organizations, and multiple personnel in sensitive alliance positions. They'd created an extensive international paper trail of fabricated concerns while never seeking legitimate professional help for their supposed worries about my mental health. NATO Legal Affairs recommended we make the case public to prevent future incidents with other alliance personnel. "This sets a dangerous precedent," the chief legal officer explained. "If families can sabotage NATO careers through false diplomatic reports, it undermines our entire alliance security structure." We contacted Michael Rodriguez, a defense journalist with Defense News, who specialized in NATO affairs. When I spoke to him via secure video link from Alliance headquarters, I felt the weight of ending my family's privacy on an international stage. "This story transcends personal family conflict," Michael said after reviewing our documentation. "This is about the vulnerability of alliance personnel to domestic psychological warfare that can compromise international security cooperation." The decision to go public wasn't easy. I spent 4 sleepless nights weighing the consequences while managing critical alliance operations. Going public meant burning bridges permanently. It meant admitting to the world that my own family had tried to destroy my international career. But it also meant protecting other alliance personnel from similar attacks. The article published on a Tuesday morning. The headline read, "When Families Wage War on NATO Careers, the Hidden Battle Facing Alliance Personnel." Within hours, my secure communications exploded with messages from across the alliance. Fellow NATO officers shared their own stories of family sabotage. Defense attachés reached out with support. Military personnel from allied nations told similar tales of families trying to force them out of international service through manufactured diplomatic crises. One message stood out from Colonel Elena Vasquez, a Spanish Air Force NATO coordinator. "Catherine, my family attempted similar diplomatic interference during my alliance assignment. You've given us all permission to speak about this abuse." But the response that mattered most came from General Hayes herself. "Major Thompson, your courage in exposing this vulnerability has strengthened alliance security and protected countless NATO personnel. This exemplifies true leadership." NATO's official response was swift and decisive. New protocols were established for handling family-initiated diplomatic concerns about alliance personnel. Security investigators received training on identifying coordinated false reporting across international channels. My fitness for alliance duty was not only confirmed, but I was recommended for accelerated promotion in senior NATO command consideration. My family's reaction was predictable and internationally humiliating. 3 years after going public, my testimony before the NATO Parliamentary Assembly changed international military family policy forever. Sitting at that witness table in my dress uniform, now wearing the silver eagles of a colonel, I felt the weight of every alliance service member who'd been silenced by family sabotage. "Honorable delegates from allied nations," I began, "what happened to me represents a critical vulnerability in our collective security. When families can weaponize diplomatic channels to undermine alliance personnel, we don't just lose individual officers. We compromise multinational cooperation and operational effectiveness across member nations." The German representative leaned forward. "Colonel Thompson, how widespread is this problem within NATO forces?" Since my story became public, over 800 alliance personnel from 17 member nations have contacted me with similar experiences. Family interference with international military careers represents a significant and underreported threat to our collective defense capabilities. The hearing lasted 12 hours across 2 days. I presented documented cases from multiple allied nations, policy recommendations developed by international military experts, and testimony from other affected alliance personnel. NATO family specialists had prepared extensive exhibits showing the scope of the problem across different cultural contexts and legal systems. During a particularly intense exchange, the French delegate asked, "Colonel Thompson, what would you say to families who genuinely fear their children's involvement in international military operations?" I looked directly into the cameras, knowing my testimony was being broadcast across all member nations. "I would say that NATO service requires family support, not family sabotage. When families undermine their children's alliance careers, they're not protecting them, they're attacking the very institution that has preserved peace in Europe for over 70 years. The Assembly Hall, filled with parliamentary delegates from 29 nations, erupted in sustained applause. 8 months later, the NATO Treaty Amendment on Personnel Protection was ratified by all member nations. The legislation created international protocols for handling family interference with alliance personnel, established cross-border investigation procedures for diplomatic sabotage, and provided legal protection for service members facing domestic interference during international assignments. The signing ceremony was held at NATO headquarters, with defense ministers from all member nations in attendance. As Secretary General Morrison handed me the ceremonial signing pen, she said, "Colonel Thompson, your courage has strengthened our alliance and protected thousands of dedicated international service members." But the most meaningful vindication came 10 months later. I was selected for promotion to Brigadier General and appointment as Deputy Allied Forces Commander, making me the youngest woman ever to serve in senior NATO command. The promotion ceremony was held in the same Brussels headquarters where my journey had begun. During the ceremony, Supreme Allied Commander General Hayes spoke words that healed years of family rejection. Brigadier General Catherine Thompson exemplifies alliance values. Her leadership in multinational operations, her courage in exposing threats to alliance families, and her unwavering dedication to collective defense represent the highest ideals of NATO service. The audience included defense ministers, senior alliance commanders, and military leaders who'd worked on the international legislation. But the person who mattered most was Lieutenant Colonel David Chen, my fellow NATO officer and now my fiancé, standing in his Canadian Army dress uniform with tears of pride in his eyes. After the ceremony, a young NATO lieutenant from Estonia approached me nervously. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. My parents tried to get me removed from alliance duty last year using similar tactics to your family. Because of your case and the new international protections, NATO immediately recognized their false reports." That evening, David and I celebrated at our favorite restaurant in Brussels' diplomatic quarter. During dinner, he handed me an envelope that had been delivered through official NATO channels. Inside was a letter from Rachel, written on Johns Hopkins International Medical letterhead, where she now worked with military families. "Catherine, I've spent 4 years working with military families across different countries, and I finally understand what our parents did to you was systematic international harassment. They tried to destroy your NATO career because they couldn't control your choices. I was complicit in that harassment, and I'm deeply ashamed. My work with alliance families has taught me about service to ideals greater than national boundaries. You were serving global peace while we were serving our own fears and prejudices. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm proud of who you became despite us, not because of us. I hope someday I can earn the right to be your sister again." I read the letter 3 times, emotions flooding through me that I'd kept buried for years. Anger, hurt, hope, and something that might have been the beginning of healing. Sekiro. 2 weeks later brought extraordinary news. The NATO Secretary General's office called with a special request. They wanted me to lead a new international task force developing policies to protect alliance families from domestic interference across all member nations. During the international press conference announcing the task force, a journalist asked, "Do you regret exposing your family's actions on the international stage?" I thought carefully before answering. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they couldn't see NATO service as honorable. But I don't regret protecting other alliance personnel from the same abuse." Sometimes serving the alliance means choosing your duty over your comfort. The task force's work would eventually protect thousands of international military families. But the real victory was knowing that no other alliance officer would face what I had faced, defending democracy abroad while their own family waged war against their service through diplomatic channels. 5 years later, I stood in NATO headquarters as a 2-star general during the most critical alliance briefing of my career. The Situation Room was filled with defense ministers, the NATO Secretary General, and allied commanders, all focused on an emerging security crisis that required immediate multinational military response. David sat in the family section during the promotion ceremony earlier that day, our 3-year-old daughter Elena, wearing a tiny replica of my NATO uniform, complete with miniature alliance flags on her shoulders. She'd insisted on matching Mama for the ceremony where I became the youngest Allied Forces General in NATO history. "General Thompson," the Secretary General said, turning to me as tensions filled the room, "we need your assessment of our alliance options." The room fell completely silent. Every defense minister, commander, and official turned to me, waiting for my strategic analysis of a situation that could determine the future of European security. "Mr. Secretary General," I began, my voice steady and commanding, "based on our multinational intelligence assessments and alliance capabilities, I recommend a coordinated 3-phase response." As I outlined the alliance strategy, I caught a glimpse of the live news feed on one of the monitors. The coverage showed my family, for the first time in 5 years, watching the briefing from their living room, their faces reflecting shock, pride, and something that looked like understanding. The moment that changed everything came after the briefing concluded. NATO's Supreme Allied Commander General Hayes approached me with formal military bearing. In front of the assembled leadership of the democratic world, he rendered a crisp salute. "Madam Allied Forces General, your strategic recommendations will be implemented across all member nations. Outstanding analysis." Later that evening, as international news coverage replayed across allied nations, my secure phone rang. It was Rachel, calling from Johns Hopkins, where she now headed the International Military Family Support Center. "Catherine, I watched the entire briefing, with a room full of NATO family liaisons. When the Secretary General turned to you for alliance guidance, everyone stood up. One of them, a veteran from Norway, said, 'That's what true international leadership looks like.'" Her voice broke with emotion. I finally understand what you were building all those years. It wasn't just a career, it was about becoming someone who could protect peace and democracy when it mattered most. We talked for 2 hours, sharing stories about our international work and carefully rebuilding something that had been broken for so long. She told me about her research on military family resilience across different cultures, how she'd started programs supporting NATO families, dealing with international deployment stress. Working with alliance families taught me what real strength looks like, she admitted. I wanted to understand the community I'd helped our family hurt. I'm sorry it took me so long to see your greatness. My parents hadn't made any public statements since my story broke internationally. According to Rachel, they'd become increasingly isolated, clinging to their old prejudices while their children moved forward into lives they couldn't understand. James had eventually reached out through Rachel to apologize, admitting that my NATO success had forced him to question everything he'd believed about international service. 6 months after my promotion to Allied Forces General, I received news that would define the rest of my legacy. The NATO Secretary General asked me to establish the Alliance Family Resilience Institute, a new multinational organization dedicated to strengthening support systems for military families across all member nations. Our first initiative was a comprehensive support program for alliance personnel facing family opposition to their international service. We provided counseling in multiple languages, legal protection across different legal systems, and advocacy services to ensure no service member would face the isolation I'd experienced. The program succeeded beyond all expectations. Within 3 years, we'd helped over 4,000 military families from 19 allied nations navigate conflicts between domestic expectations and international military service. The moment that healed my deepest wounds came at our 3rd annual Alliance Family Unity Ceremony. As I stood at the podium in NATO's main assembly hall, recognizing outstanding military families from across the alliance, I saw movement near the entrance. My parents had quietly entered and taken seats in the back row. Leal y Ruiz, after the ceremony, they approached hesitantly. My father spoke first. Catherine, we've spent 5 years watching your career from a distance. We were wrong. About everything. I looked at them and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of reconciliation. We hope, my father continued, that someday you might let us try to be the parents you deserved, and the grandparents Elena deserves. Sometimes breaking generational patterns means accepting that not everyone will follow you into greatness, but someone has to lead the way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.